Settled? Okay, so the next and last session for today is very critical as it explores public and private collaboration for food system transformation. How can we expand and maximize opportunities for PPP to support agricultural value chain financing and food system transformation also? To further discuss the perspective, insights, and ways forward for this very relevant topic, let us call on Suzanne Gaburi, Director General of ADB's Private Sector Operations Department. Over to you, DG Suzanne. Thank you.
I think the coffee and snacks outside must be very tasty. But welcome, everyone. Welcome to, I wanted to welcome you all to the third session here on public-private partnership. And as you will have heard, we've discussed a number of remarkable changes in the agri-food system and in the region in the previous sessions. With that in mind, what I wanted to do is that let this panel engage with experienced policy advisors, corporate leaders, to foster stronger collaboration between the public and private sectors. And this is really a key going forward, with the purpose to kindle and sustain the entrepreneurial spirit in transforming the agri value chain from production, processing, logistics to retail distribution, including nutrition, resource management and research, and also applications. So this is a very timely discussion, given that ADB last year rolled out its new operating model. And part of that was with 4 major shifts, especially, and one of the main pillars of that is to look at private sector development and private sector shift, along with the climate shift, which we know that strategically fits with the impact that ADB can have through the agri-food sector. Having been raised on a farm in Western Canada, the agri-space is something that's rather close to my heart. So, and I do understand some of the situations or the issues that the industry is facing. Private sector is pivotal in ADB's transition towards its new operating model, because it's driving initiatives that foster growth, inclusive growth, and alleviate poverty through the Asia-Pacific region. With its extensive involvement in infrastructure, financial sectors, capital markets, health, education, agribusiness, the private sector spearheads innovative solutions that leverage resources and expertise to address the region's pressing developmental challenges, thereby amplifying the impact of ADB's efforts. Specifically, I wanted to go through a few things why agri-food sector is a key priority for ADB. Last year, we announced $14 billion commitment for food security covering the period between 2022 and 2025. And through that, we needed to include 25% through the private sector. Each year, we deploy about $1 billion in private sector commitments to agribusiness companies, banks, microfinance institutions, private equity funds, as well as to support trade transactions for food and agriculture. The focus on agri-food is consistent with ADB's ambition to be the climate bank for Asia and the Pacific. We know that the agri-food accounts for approximately 1/3 of global emissions, and there is an urgent need to decarbonize the sector, especially in emissions causing as sectors or subsectors on fertilizer, rice, livestock, deforestation, and food losses. At the same time, Asia's 400 million smallholder farmers are amongst the most vulnerable, and there is urgent need for climate adaptation finance as well to make these farmers more resilient and prosperous. A decade ago, ADB created a dedicated agribusiness investment team to provide direct debt and equity financing to private sector companies along the value chain, from seed companies to supermarkets, so from farm to fork. This small but very dynamic team has deployed about $1.2 billion, over 40 investments across 32 clients in 20 developing member countries. So I'm really pleased today that some of our existing and prospective clients are here today on this panel. We will focus on enabling, catalyzing, mobilizing private sector capital for the region. And as you've heard, this is very much in line with the G20 discussions on private capital mobilization and trying to mobilize private sector generally. We work very closely with our sovereign teams on the enabling environment, and we seek to partner with global and regional players as well as local companies on innovative projects. In addition, we also work with global and domestic financial institutions to scale up financing for bankable investments. We have a syndications team that part of their job is to bring in third-party capital so that we can actually have greater impact on the investments that we're doing. So with the 4 critical areas to transform the agri-food system by 2030, I think we'd like to discuss with our panelists today, firstly, promoting climate-smart agriculture. Second, financing nature-based solutions. Third, strengthening agri-food connectivity. And fourth, supporting the production of healthier foods. Investments required along these 4 areas to transform the agri-food system have been estimated about $350 billion per year, the bulk of which is expected to come from the private sector. And this means that there are immense opportunities for bankable and profitable investments. The business opportunity of this has been estimated at over $4.5 trillion per year and through the whole region. So the right policy conditions, the right mitigation tools are needed really to unlock these investments. And this is why we need very strong public-private partnerships. So what I would like to do is to take it our next step. I wanted to, so we can dive into these meaty discussions. And I wanted to introduce our keynote speaker and then panel members, and I'll refer to their only current positions in the interest of time. I think that you have their CVs in the forum brochure. So our keynote presenter is Professor Ashok Gulati, a renowned professor under the Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations, an autonomous policy-oriented think tank aimed at enhancing policy making through analytical research. He will be joined by 5 distinguished panelists through this session. Let me start with Shri Govardhan Singh Rawat. My apologies if I got the name, this pronunciation incorrect. Who is the Deputy Managing Director of the National Bank for Agriculture and Rural Development in India, which is a large development bank in India. Our second panelist is no stranger to policymaking. Bruce Tolentino is a monetary board member for the Philippine Central Bank, which regulates the Philippine banking system. Our third panelist, Wei Zhu, is the director of the Agri-Food Division of Temasek, which is a Singapore-based global investment company with close to $300 billion in portfolio covering various industries, including agri-food. The next panelist is Anja Westwick, who is currently the Director for Strategic Supply Chain for Dali, which operates hard discount retail stores in the Philippines. And obviously last but not least is Prasoon Kumardas, who is the Secretary General of the Asia Pacific Rural and Agricultural Credit Association, which is aimed at improving the rural poor's welfare across Asia Pacific through knowledge sharing, capacity building, and research. So if I could ask Professor Ashok and the panelists, I think if we can just bring all the panelists up on to the stage, and then we'll hand it over to Professor Ashok to present his keynote speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Suzanne, and distinguished participants. Pleasure to be here to share a few thoughts on the topic of public-private partnership in agri-systems transformations. Let's see what the food system is. If you look at that, this is one of the biggest private sector activity perhaps. You have on the production side from farmers, seed industry, fertilizer industry, pesticide, and all these players on the production side. You have on the marketing side and the logistics, and then you have on the consumption side. We heard a lot in the morning about moving from food security to nutritional security. That's an important part of the game. We looked at malnutrition and obesity questions, but the innovations that are taking place in basic staples for the poor, whether it is rice or wheat, zinc-rich rice that is coming up, iron-rich pearl millets are coming up, but I don't know how many in the room have ever experienced blue or purple wheat or even black wheat. I have been a guinea pig. 5 to 10 times more antioxidants than the normal. All these things, new innovations in the products that we are producing with much richer nutritional content of it, they need to be sold as superfoods. And that is not the job of the government, it has to be the job of the private sector, branding it and putting it in the market. I have yet to see, it's in the labs, it is coming up at the farmer level, but still I'm looking at the whole value chain where it is not being. We haven't heard much about the marketing and logistics challenge, and that will be a critical one. We have been concentrating more on the production aspect, and in the wake of climate change, that is under threat. Let's see what happens. One more point that I need to flash here. We haven't talked about much of farmers' incomes. If we want to change their farming practices that are more climate resilient and nature friendly, even talking of removing subsidies is a non-starter. No farmer will accept that their income goes down. So if you can increase their income, and along with that, if you ask for better farming practices that are in tune with nature, then you have a chance to succeed. So this is critical, and I'll be talking a little bit on that front. It's not moving. Yeah. Now the system, food systems are under transformation, dramatic, because of population that is increasing. 2030 global population 8.5 billion, and by 2050 9.7 billion, and by 2100 it is likely to be about 11 billion. And I'll come back to that because that's putting all the pressure and degrading all the soil, water issues of greenhouse gas emissions. But we haven't talked about much in the morning on increasing urbanization. And we will see some slides. Much of Asia, bigger countries of Asia, already some countries, China, Indonesia, more than 50%, almost 60% of population is going in urban areas, and the food has to be transported. So a bigger and bigger role of the logistics and the marketing and storage activity needs to be kept in mind. Increasing fragmentation of land holdings, and that is, I'll come back to that slide because that's a challenge. And many people say what these small fragmented farmers can do in the world, whether they are just parking a lot of the poor or they can deliver food, and we'll come to that a bit. Extreme weather events, we know what is happening on the temperature, and as a result of that, I'll give you only one little example. Last year, India had El Nino, not a drought, just the El Nino effect for 3-4 weeks. There was a break in the monsoon season, and the agriculture growth dropped from 4.7% to 0.7%. So that can be a dramatic change just because of 2-3 weeks of break during the monsoon season as a result of El Nino. So this volatility is going to increase even more as the global warming picks up. And government alone cannot tackle all this. We have to join hands with the private sector where much of the resources are. I do want to bring on this table the first basic factor I talked about, the population. You look at, Homo sapiens, our tribe, 300,000 years to 200,000 years back, this is what the period was, and it took us more than 200,000 years to become 1 billion in 1804. 1 billion Homo sapiens, more than 200,000 years. The next billion was added in 123 years. And the next billion was only in 33 years, and then the next billion added in 14 years, and 13 years, and 11 years, and 12 years. So you look at what has happened in the last 200 years has never happened in the previous 200,000 years. The planet is the same, the land is the same, but population has exploded, and therefore the challenge and the pressure on the natural resources on it. Asia, which is the biggest part here, and you can see, is stabilizing in terms of population, and it will start actually declining. China will be the first one, and India, though still growing, but it will start stabilizing and coming down. I think the biggest challenge on this planet for food and nutritional security in the years to come will be in Africa, which is still growing population-wise much faster what India or China was growing perhaps in 1960s. This is what I was saying about the urbanization phenomenon that is coming up, and we will have to find new innovative solutions to produce food even in the urban areas with much higher capital, or transport all this from the rural areas and build all those value chains and supply chains to do that. Where Indonesia and China are today, more than 60% roughly of urban population, that's where much of the South Asia would be in the next 15 to 20 years, and therefore the biggest challenge that is going to happen. This is something amazing. The input industry is scaling up, the wholesale and logistics suppliers are scaling up, agro-processors are scaling up, retailers are scaling up, exporters, everybody is scaling up except the farming, which is still under pressure, except perhaps in China where the holding size has started increasing because people are leaving agriculture and going to urban areas, but still, what is their average holding size? Less than a hectare. And all other countries, the major countries of Asia Pacific, you will see India, Indonesia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, they are still fragmenting, and the holding size is becoming smaller and smaller. And many a times we feel, what is it that these small farmers will do? I recall I was in Illinois on a farmer's field, and he was saying, oh, I'm a small holder, I have only 120 acres of land. And I said, do you know in India what is the average holding size? 1 hectare, that is 2.5 acres. And he said, how do they do farming? With kitchen knives and forks? And I said, yes. And still they can feed 1.4 billion people. A point that I want to emphasize here on the smallholder question, which the president of IFAD mentioned. One example, India today is the largest producer of milk in the world, 230 million tons. The second largest producer of milk is US at 103 million tons. 230 and 103 million tons. In 1951, US was at 53 and India was at 17, 1/3. Today we are more than double, and it is all done by the smallholders. Average herd size is 4, less than 4. What I did not hear in the morning was we were talking about innovations in technology, new policies, but innovation in institutions. The milk revolution of India was not as much a technology. The technology was a simple lactometer to measure how much is the fat content. It was an institutional innovation, putting smallholders together and creating a stake. I think that is one of the ways to create an inclusive growth model. Otherwise, when we think about private sector, we think only of the big companies. How much inclusive that is and what share of that goes to the small farmers is a big question mark on that. So I do want to say here, smallholders can do, and they have done it. In fact, China is being fed, India is being fed by smallholders. 1.4 billion, Africa is another 1.4 billion. China has become a net importer of food, Africa is a net importer of food, but India is still a net exporter of food. And it is all the story of smallholders. So there is a possibility if we have the institutional mechanism to do it. In the World Economic Forum, the threats that were talked about, 1490 business leaders who were interviewed along with political leaders and academics, extreme weather events is the topmost threat and to food system. I was happy to hear that it's not that agriculture will be adversely impacted by climate change, but agriculture can also act as a carbon sink and therefore become a good source of income for the farmers, provided we have the institutional structure to do it, and that's a challenge. On the question of finance and US to pay, we also need to know who are the biggest emitters and who are the actually countries that are suffering. All the red ones you can see in the Africa is going to be the worst victim of it for no fault of theirs. It's much of the emissions coming from top countries, China, USA, India, Russia, and Brazil. And I think there has to be a realization that there is a payback period to others who are suffering. On the PPP thing, one thing that I want to put on the table, there is no dearth of finance. You can unleash a whole system if you are smart in policy making. And some regulatory policies. In the Indian system, we had a policy that all the banks, whether private banks or public sector banks, 18% of their total credit has to be given to agriculture. Why can't we say that at least 10%, 15% of that has to go for climate smart agriculture? If we put that in place, all the finance constraints are likely to. This is the ESG framework. Europe has gone for that and putting a little pressure on many of the private players on that. So if you are smart in policy making, then you can raise a lot of finance from the banks or from the private sector, CSR activity. All this money can come in and put in the right. We know the technical solutions. It's not a brainer to think today you have the technologies to produce more with less. The precision farming is an answer to that. Technologies are there, but they are not scaling up. Some startups are there, few have scaled up a little bit, but many of the technologies we have been hearing for the last 20 years are not scaling up because the policy environment of today is still 40 years old, 50 years old. So it is not giving enough incentive to the new technologies and not rewarding those which can produce more with less. Can't get into each and every one, but all these things, we know protected cultivation, we know drip irrigation, we know vertical farming that's coming up. All these things are very much on the table, and only 10 days back I had a meeting where a young lady, 27 years old, compared to open field farming, if you switch to protected cultivation, can earn 10 times more, 10 times more. Productivity goes up 3 times more. With drip and other things, you can reduce the consumption of water, the fertilizer, the greenhouse gas emissions. All over Asia you would see rice, which is the prime crop, being cultivated through flood irrigation, creating methane. And if you apply fertilizer on that, granular urea, I know of my country in Punjab, the seat of Green Revolution, 250 kilograms of fertilizers. Plant is consuming only 35%, rest is going into the environment and nitrous oxide, and nitrous oxide is 273 times the carbon equivalence. And you are subsidizing that heavily, 75%, 80% subsidy on urea to create this type of poison. So the policies need to change. We will not subsidize soluble fertilizers which can be used in the fertigation, which can reduce all the methane emission, increase productivity, save water by 40%, but the policy doesn't subsidize that. It subsidizes. So there is a lot of role that policies need to fine-tune for the new climate concerns. These are some of the numbers from the research studies, what the benefits of micro-irrigation. But the issue is why in China it's only about 6-7 million hectares, so is in India micro-irrigation. Why not 50 million hectares coming up under that? Why we are still using flood irrigation? Agri R&D. We did speak in the morning that investment $1 billion in agri R&D can give you 5 to 10 times more returns than on subsidies. But in my country, we give fertilizer subsidy to the tune of $20 billion, but on agri R&D of the Indian Council of Agriculture Research, we don't give even $2 billion. And that's a major, and that's where the political economy works, that today I give you something free, you give me votes, and if you have to wait for some research, R&D. But private sector, the bigger players, global players, I have the data even up to 2021, but they said keep it in reserve because it's still not public material. 5 to 10% of their revenue, the big players from Bayer on, Bayer is spending 10% of its agri revenue on agri R&D, and others are also 5 to 10%, that's the range. Look at the countries, the public sector research, this is the ASTI data, it's 0.2%, 0.3%, 0.4% of agriculture GDP in the country. So I think public sector gives too much subsidies and too little on agri R&D, and there is a big message here. This is from food to nutritional security. All these things are already there in the system, but they need to be taken up by the private sector for propagating further into more nutritious foods. One thing that's not touched upon, you know, today in the urban areas, vehicular pollution is one of the things that the countries are trying to tackle. And they are going in a big way towards EVs, electric vehicles. Tomorrow you would see a similar movement in the rural areas of tractors and harvest combines moving in that direction. But if they start charging from electricity that is being produced by thermal, then there is no net gain. And rural areas are where all the land is available. At present, there is a policy of solar parks to create solar energy. But why? And then there is a rooftop in most of the countries going up for that. Why not have on each farm, if you have spacing and 10 to 12 feet high, so that there is enough sunlight that will keep coming for photosynthesis of the crop, you can have assured irrigation, and this becomes your third crop. And this will give you income even if there is a drought. So this is the real crop insurance. Agrovoltaics as a third crop, but policy tweak is needed so that the state government or the company that is distributing electricity has to buy at a price negotiated upon. So this is a big scope for augmenting farmers' income, creating clean energy in the rural areas. And quite a few developments are taking place in agrovoltaics in developed countries, Germany, Japan, and all this. I think this is one potential where incomes of the smallholders, otherwise they are not able to feed their family with 1 acre. If you can put agrovoltaics along with the crops, then there is a much better chance for. Another thing, smallholders, seed is perfectly divisible, water can be divisible, fertilizers can be divisible, but farm machinery for a very small holder is a challenge. But the farm machinery services, if you can create Uberization of the farm machinery, and there are digital platforms to do that, I think that is picking up with some of the private companies. This is coming up as one of the solutions to cut down their costs and also looking at. The latest that's coming up are the drones for precision farming in a way, or sprays that are to be done. The Indian government is coming up with 15,000 women being trained as drone didis, which will be used. I think this is the women entrepreneurship along with the modern technologies. Last one little thing, because much of the methane, there are two culprits in a way in agriculture. One is the rice and the other is livestock, the antric fermentation that takes place. In a country like India, you cannot slaughter the cows because of religious reasons, and 50% are bulls, which are not needed anymore on the farms because of farm tractorization and all that farm machinery that is coming up. So they are sitting on the road. And this technology of sex-sorted semen technology, which the private sector is bringing in, I think can change the entire complexion of this within the next 10, 15 years. And India is likely to be producing, not 230 million tons, but 400 million tons very soon. Last slide. If we have to find a solution to climate change, it's not only a question of adaptation and mitigation in agriculture. Much of this story is coming outside agriculture, and that is the energy part, and we have to tackle that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ashok, for your inspiring speech and learning lots of new things that I had not heard of before. And I say that your last slide in particular, I was in charge of our artificial insemination program on the farm, so some of these things, kind of hit a little close to home. So thank you very much. What I'd like to now do is to call upon Anya, Bruce, Prasoon, and Shri Governhan and Vey to actually start the panel discussion. So what I wanted to do is to turn to Wei as the first question. We've been hearing a lot more and more about climate-smart agriculture. It was just brought up, especially in the context of climate change. Could you share with us some climate-smart ag technologies you are seeing which affects smallholder farmers? What are some of the precursors and key trends for this? But also, do you think there is a role for the government in promoting these technologies? Is to Wei. Yeah.
Yeah, hi. Nice to be here, and thanks for the question. So I think from a climate, so I work for Temasek, which is an investment company. So my team invests in both large, mature food and agri enterprises, as well as kind of like supporting entrepreneurs who are creating new ventures with the goal of providing technology or disruptive solutions for the sector. So I think in the last couple of years, I think obviously the ag tech space has really blossomed. And I think we've seen a lot more innovations. And I think the the innovations come from, I think the key things that we found most probably relevant from a smallholder farmer perspective are probably digital tools. So I think drones was one of the topics that was mentioned earlier. I think that has a lot of potential because effectively, historically, if you go to the places like US, you're looking at John Deere machinery, which is really meant for farmers who own hundreds or thousands of hectares of land. So now I think you're, like downsizing a lot of large pieces of machinery into much smaller components, which are still relatively cost efficient and effective even on smallholder farms. I think that will be number one. And I think number two, I think is solutions that tends to be sensorless rather than having a sensor, because the cost of for any company to roll out software or hardware devices to support smallholder farmers, there's a very high fixed cost involved, because every farmer you're going to is adding 1 hectare or 2 hectare. So you end up installing devices like everywhere, and that obviously translates into a higher cost of service. So I think what we've seen are innovative solutions that's really more of a wireless. I think using technologies like satellite technology to keep track of things like soil health, right? If that was to work, I think that is going to be a lot more cost efficient versus a sensor-based soil health detecting machine. So I think those are some of the more relevant examples. And then I think one of the big topics that we spoke about today is around the topic of financing. I think most smallholders require some form of working capital financing, and given the state of their operations, a lot of them are operating on fairly basic system processes or pens and notebooks, right? Which makes a large part of them very difficult to be banked. So I think providing the farmers the right set of tools that then allows them to tap into the traditional banking facilities, that allows them to access funds which are at lower rates than what they're typically getting to. I think probably those three things combined, from my perspective, are the more easily adoptable solutions for smallholder farmers.
Thanks very much. Bruce, if I could turn to you, please. Since we're on the topic of farmers, and given the importance in the whole agri-food chain, value chain, what programs or financing solutions is BSP promoting to help farmers?
Well, we're talking about policy, and let me pick up on something that Professor Gulati said. He said that at a certain point, the government, by law, should force banks to lend to farmers certain proportions of their loanable funds to push climate-friendly solutions. That's what I heard from you. Now, in the Philippines, there has been a quota on loans from banks to farmers for the last 50 years. And that quota has been 25% of your loanable funds. And not only is the quota 25% of your loanable funds, it's got to be a quota that says that banks should lend directly to farmers for production only. And not only that, part of the quota has to be directed to agrarian reform beneficiaries, real live agrarian reform beneficiaries. The problem is, well, farmers don't really get access to banks. What they have access to is parts of the value chain that is familiar with them. So you don't lend a rice farmer money because you're going to lose it, but you lend money to the rice mill, which then knows the farmers much better. And in fact, a rice mill is a local monopoly that knows the local area very well and has a relationship with the farmers in that locality. They know the lending situation in that locality better, much better than the banks. So if you broaden the quota so that it lends to the entire value chain, so that you're lending not only to farmers, but you're lending to processors and transporters and mills and warehouse owners, the entire value chain, then you're better able to finance the agricultural sector. Also broaden it so that not only production is supported, but also processing, drying, transport, and other types of activities that you find in the rural area. Then you're able to enable the banks to lend to a much broader swath of players in the countryside. So that reform only happened last year. Prior to that, banks would pay the penalty to the central bank in order to avoid lending to farmers, because they found it much cheaper to pay the penalty rather than to be forced to lend to farmers. We've had the reform for 1 year, and in that year, loans to farmers and agriculture have quadrupled, and the penalties paid by the banks to the central bank have been cut down by 6 times. So reforms to enable the private sector to act according to their best interest, and for government to provide the public goods necessary so that the private sector can do its best, are crucial. And just to end, let me turn back to India. India is now the world's largest exporter of rice. And the reason why they're the world's largest exporter of rice is because Eastern India used Erie technology. They brought it to India, adapted it to local conditions in Eastern India, especially flood-tolerant rice, and put it into the extension system. And the extension system spread it out to all the farmers in Eastern India, and as a result, India is now the world's largest exporter of rice. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Wow. Some pretty concrete examples of enabling of our policy changes, which leads me very nicely into a question back to you, Professor Ashok, which is about your view. You've given us some ideas on some key factors or policies to enable the private sector, or which would be good for the private sector within the enabling environment. But maybe you can give us a little bit more of what you've seen and what can be easily replicated.
Well, as was mentioned, that first thing is go beyond production. These policies were framed when India in particular was extremely short of food. So the entire focus of policy was produce, produce, produce. This has to change, and I fully endorse that. You have to take the full value chain and look at that system, the food system as a whole, but not just processing and consumption, also bring in the environmental considerations in that policy tweaking. So if somebody is adopting certain methods or technologies which can save water or reduce greenhouse gas emissions, what is the reward, green credits that we are giving? That policy has not come up yet. So first time I saw in India, one of the private sector, Myco, came up with a brand called it's low carbon rice. That's under that branding they are giving that. So the question is, can we scale up those types of experiments? Can we support and repurpose the subsidies in a manner which are more nature friendly rather than damaging like fertilizer or free power and so on and so forth? So you need to reorient, repurpose, and bring the value chain approach, including nutrition and nature-friendly issues. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Again, this flows very nicely into another topic that we were looking at a little bit more about nature-based solutions. So, Shri Gurunhan, if I can turn to you. In the context of India, what kind of sustainable practices have you seen being implemented or developed, which feeds a little bit on what Professor Ashok was saying? And what are the main success factors for effective programs in advancing sustainable agricultural practices, which can lead to a better public-private partnership?
Thank you. First of all, I would like to mention that as an organization, our priority is on inclusive development. And as Professor Gulati was mentioning about the fragmented landholding in India, so more than 86% of farmers in India are small and marginal farmers. And when you talk about these small and marginal farmers, as far as their entire value chain, right from getting the inputs, access to credit, access to irrigation, access to inputs, and the post-production aspects also, so entire marketing aspect. So all these things are very crucial. And there are issues related to reaching out to these small and marginal farmers because of this basic aspect of their very low requirement individually. So as an organization, our entire policy and priority is that how do we aggregate them, how do we bring them in a community-based organization, and then on top of that, work on every aspect, whether it's input supply, whether it's sustainable agriculture, whether it is bringing any type of policy or marketing, anything of that sort. That is the focus on aggregation of these farming communities, especially the small and marginal farmers, into aggregation model. So for that, what we have done is promotion of farmers producer organizations or farmers producer companies is one basic perspective that we have started. Well before the government of India started, NABARD started forming these farmers producer organization. And subsequently government also chipped in. So right now, NABARD alone has promoted more than 8,000 farmers producer organization. And through them, we are trying to implement all the activities. As far as this sustainable agriculture is concerned, we started with many activities right from soil and water conservation activities. That also we started with a group of farmers because individually it's not possible to do. So what I'm trying to say is, so if you want to do any activity related to farming activities in India, we have to do it with a group of farmers, the community-based organization. We have to work on strengthening these community-based organizations. And for that, now what we are trying to do is, one is strengthening them as a community-based organization, because unless they are tied up together, many things will be very difficult to implement. Second is to provide them technology so that many of the aspects related to any activity can be done in a much better way, in a much efficient way, and at a lower cost also. Because individually, they will not be in a position to afford that. For example, I'll give you one example of sustainability and how this farmers group has helped in ensuring it. So, India has about 50 to 53% irrigated area. The rest of it is entirely rain-fed. So dependence on rain is very huge, very high. So in one of our areas where we do the water conservation and soil conservation activities, there was issue related to farmers' wells being dried up by, say, November, December. So they were able to take only one crop. But with the help of soil and moisture conservation technology, we are able to increase the water harvesting, number one. Number two, we adopted the micro irrigation facility on top of these wells where the water were harvested. So micro irrigation itself saved some around 30-35% of the water. And on top of micro irrigation, we used a IoT-based, sensor-based irrigation system where the water or the micro irrigation system will trigger only when there is a stress on the crop. So it saved another 30-40% of water. And the farmers, those who were able to take only one crop, we are able to increase the cropping intensity by 30 to 40%. That means the water which was originally available up to December, it went up to March, April. So these are the types of activities, because individually, if you take 1 farmer, 2 farmer, 10 farmer, it may not be possible. But as a group, we are able to do it. We provided them capacity building. We provided them the assistance, hand-holding in terms of how to harvest water and soil. We also gave them technology. And the best part of it is that initially about 80 to 100 farmers adopted it. Subsequently, there were another 100 and 200 those who adopted it. So this is one area, farmers producer organizations, where we are promoting in a big way, hand-holding them to adopt different technologies. We are providing them financial assistance through our subsidies at our own also. We are providing them technological assistance. In some of the cases, like our colleague mentioned, our co-panelist mentioned here, the focus on how do we address because of the policy changes. So the farmers producer organizations, so we are providing them not only credit assistance, but also credit to the farmers producer organizations and not directly to the farmers, because the farmers producer organizations knows the farmer much better than a bank does. So one is providing finance to the farmers producer organization. Second is providing the credit guarantee to the banks so that they lend to the farmers producer organizations. And then there are insurance on top of it. And we are also providing and converging with different Government of India schemes where there is a capital subsidy for creation of agri-infrastructure. There is inter-subvention, and we have kept aside about 500 million so that such agri-technologies, agri-infrastructure is created at the ground level through concessional finance. So we have kept $500 million for this concessional finance, where we are promoting these different types of agri-infrastructure facilities which will help in the various sustainable activities. Second layer, apart from this cooperative, is the primary cooperative agriculture cooperative societies. So that is another area which is having a big network in the entire country. We have more than 1 lakh primary cooperative societies working across the country. We have about 1.5 lakh cooperative societies which are working under the dairy sector, dairy cooperative sector. So these are the sectors where we want to strengthen them and implement entire schemes of government, the credit facilities through these cooperatives. Because like farmers producer companies, these credit societies also aggregate the farmers. So they not only provide the credit to these various members, but they can also provide it credit plus facilities and services also. Professor Gulati was mentioning about the drone services. So individual farmer will not be in a position to buy a drone worth 8-9 lakh rupees. But if it is given as a service, so that is what our primary cooperative societies are providing. They are purchasing farm implements, drones, and various equipments, and providing these services, these equipments as a service to its members. So it's reducing their cost. The farmer doesn't have to invest heavily. Individual farmers doesn't have to invest heavily. So these are the various measures and activities that we are doing so that the sustainability, especially of the small marginal farmers in India, that is taken care of.
Thanks very much. Again, lots of insights here, which I think is very, very interesting. But Wei, if I could turn back to you just again about nature-based solutions for agri-systems. And when we think about this, we think about regenerative agriculture, sustainable forestry, or sustainable aquaculture. Given Tamasek's wide coverage and experience, what are some key investments done in this space, and what kind of sustainable practices have you seen and promoted?
Right. Maybe I'll start off with one that's more from a technological angle. So I think I think we all know that I think sustainable forestry is an area that's generating a fair bit of interest, given the potential to be a carbon, to capture carbon. So we've invested in a US business called Living Carbon, and I think they focus on doing gene editing for trees. Effectively, I think they're saying that just like how most of you have a lot of large breeders around the world where they do a lot of breeding for things like flood resistance rice, right? You have kind of like heat resistance crops, but on the other hand, eventually if you're trying to grow a forest purely for the sake of carbon capture, you want trees that have a stronger ability to kind of like, I guess, a faster rate of photosynthesis, which eventually leads to trees to growing up faster, taller, right, bigger. And I think that's effectively their focus. So I think the first generation of trees that they developed has already shown a meaningful improvement in terms of, if most trees take, I think it's about 30% rate of growth compared to traditional pre-engineered trees. So I think obviously then the next part is they need to convince the respective countries where they want to commercialize the varieties that there needs to be some degree of IP protection rights. They also need to make sure that the countries will allow such genetics to come in. Usually there's some degree of regulatory constraints in terms of you have to quarantine the varieties for periods of years. So I think that we think is one of the more innovative ways of finding a new tool to kind of like catalyze this space. And then I think second of all, we've made a very different kind of investment. We've made a capital commitment to a fund manager in Asia. It's called the New Forest Fund. They manage about $10 billion of capital. They manage over 1.4 million, I think it's hectares of properties. And what they are able to do is that because of the scale and reach that they have, they can invest a lot more into technology. They invest a lot more into improving business processes and stuff. And all these things translates into better forestry management methodologies. So one of the things that they do is, I think they use a lot of drones. One of the biggest risks in forestry is obviously forest fires. So if a part of your forest burns down, I think you're losing a very valuable asset, and it sets you back. So I think having early detection mechanisms, which are then reinforced with kind of like a quick response to put out any fire before it becomes, getting that fire contained becomes a very important, valuable driver. And obviously, if you're able to mitigate the risk of forest fires, I think overall you're also reducing the any kind of like carbon that gets leaked back into the air. So I think those are some of the examples that we've seen. But again, coming back to what everyone is saying, I think the key for all this technology is that it has to come from a place of value creation. It has to be enlarging the pie. It shouldn't be a value transfer between one part of the value chain to the other. The reality is that I think in most parts of the agri and food value chain, margins are already thin to begin with. These are not high-tech software businesses where there's a lot of like buffer. So in the end, I think all this technology has to be designed with a goal of improving efficiency, creating, lowering cost for the entire system, or improving the value of that product. And I think where then connectivity with some of the public sector policies and stuff is around like creating all these mechanisms so that the benefits that's created in the value chain is at least trickles down through the entire supply chain between the growers, the processors, the retailers, and so on and so forth, and mitigate any instance where a disproportionate value is captured by a single part, right, which then prevents the benefit from flowing through. And I think that's one of the things that's probably interesting to keep an eye out for.
Thanks very much. Anya, I wanted to turn to you now, please, and shift gears a little bit. Having strong agri-food connectivity is crucial to ensuring that the population has adequate access to affordable, sufficient and affordable food supply. What is the significance of having sufficient warehouses, storage, and logistics, which will streamline delivery of agri-food products or agri-products generally from the source to the end users? And also in the Philippine context, how does DALI enable this seamless connectivity?
Yeah, thank you for the question. For those of you who don't come from the Philippines but have traveled the world elsewhere, I give you a brief introduction what DALI is so that you have the concept. It's kind of a copy of an Aldi store. So wherever you've been in the world and have come across an Aldi, if it's US, Australia, or Europe. It's kind of the same thing in a different color. It's magenta here, and it's a lot smaller than a modern Aldi store. But the concept is the same. It's limited assortment, 400 products. To give you a brief description, so we're not a full-scale supermarket. We entered the market in the Philippines in 2020, opened up by now 628 stores within those 4 years. And what makes us unique is a high focus on efficiency. We don't have huge scale stores. It's 275 to 300 square meters per store. We have now five distribution centers in the Philippines, servicing those 630 stores. I call them specifically not warehouses, but distribution centers, because the goods are coming in and turning within a matter of a few days outside right away to the stores. The stores are serviced pretty much every day to every second day, depending on the volume of the store. But the product is on a constant flow through from distribution center to stores and right away to the consumers. So one part of that is when you think of food waste, and where's a lot of food waste. And in my previous company that I worked for, Aldi, for 30 years, there's certainly enough the topic of food waste coming along as well at some point. Food waste in our kind of business is not a big issue because it just doesn't get very old. So you don't have a lot of space where you store product, not even in the store, because in the Philippines here we have about a space for 2 to 3 boxes, cases. So we don't stock different cans of goods in the shelf that you then have to rotate, but it's just in boxes being placed, and you just rotate 2 maximum, 2 boxes, and then take the last one out, put new ones in. So food waste in that doesn't really happen for our business. I need to say though, we do not, or the freshest product that we sell is about eggs and breads with a shelf life of a few days. We do not sell produce, fruit and vegetables, so that's a big differentiation. And that's probably where the most food waste could come in. But we do sell a few chilled items, we do sell freezer items. We have a very efficient way on transporting that, not in freezer trucks, but just in little tiny boxes that stay cold with kind of accus, I don't even know. I'm missing the word right now, but those deposits in frozen that you put in and keeps the box for frozen products cold enough to stay in there for 12 to 15 hours. So within a distance of about an hour from warehouse or distribution center to store, this is more than secure to keep it in a constant running of 12 to 15 hours, even if the box cannot be unloaded right away. So I think that is our system. This is how we do it, but definitely efficiency is a big part in that, and definitely timeliness is a big part in that. So paying attention to expiration dates, to fast sell-through is a huge benefit in that.
Thanks very much. It sounds very much like a little bit from my business school days, long time ago, just in time. So applying that approach. What I'd like to do is to turn to Prasoon now, if I could, please. And what I wanted to do is to ask you of examples where favorable policies and financial sustainability emerged as the key factors in agri-food connectivity that increase the likelihood of replication, as well as provide some major lessons to the region.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I think we discussed a lot about the technologies and financial inclusion, But we have the real taxonomy for each of these. Most of our policymakers, even one of my colleagues sitting here, we think financial inclusion is credit and savings. In 90% cases, we think so, but it's not the financial inclusion. Financial inclusion is basically what we defined it as the resource inclusion, which includes all the resources available to the farming community or to the farmers or even to the actors in the downstream of the value chain. That, because all of them has a financial value which we do not consider. The most striking part of the financial inclusion which is excluded is the insurance. Insurance should also come into the financial inclusion, and we will see in this region, particularly in Asia Pacific, the farmer do not have the access to the insurance until there is a public-private partnership. The countries where they have a public-private partnership, insurance, crop insurance, livestock insurance are successful. But if you see the private insurance companies, they are interested. But in this particular region, we do not have the reinsurers. A private insurance company cannot be successful without a proper reinsurer. We do have seen some reinsurers coming from many other, some of the European countries and Japan, Korea, but ultimately they lose out of this market. My last 11 years of experience of working with APRACA and working in 24 countries of this region, 96 financial institutions, including 20 central banks, what we have found that we never do this conversation, how to bring the insurance as a part of our financial inclusion. The second issue is that whenever we talk about the private-public partnership, we do not think about the value chain. Without value chain, public-private partnership is not possible. Local business in any, our professor was talking about why our rest of the value chain actors, they are scaling up, but not the farmers. Why they are not scaling up, rather they are scaling down. The reason is not only that they are migrating to the greener pasture in the cities, but the major reason is that they don't see business at the local level. So when you see if you do it in X and Y axis, if you see that if you want a farmer to go up in their ladder, need to have developed local business system, and where we need a public-private partnership. We should go beyond, to moving forward, we now call it the producer, public and private partnership. Rather, we changed it now to producer, private and public. Public should come in the last, as a last resort, as a supporting institution, not as a funding institution. As I think Professor said rightly, that government or public sector, they don't do business. They never should do business. They should support the business only through many policies or now coming to the success factors. We have done some studies in this region, 7 countries, which was published by FAO long back in 2013. What we found that the 4 major things. One is what each of these public-private sector are bringing to the table. I think everybody knows it. They bring many technology, they bring their expertise and investment. The second one is that who is the beneficiary? If the private sector is the major beneficiary of that PPP, then there is a success. If it is public sector is beneficiary, it is not that successful. So private sector need to understand that where they get the success. The third one is that whether there is any accountability. Public sector has the accountability because, as you know, that if it is a government department, they have to have a system of reporting. But whether the private sector has the accountability. So the accountability is becoming more and more important as a success factor. And the fourth one is that accessing the natural resources. Whether government or the public sector allows the private sector to access those resources. And the fifth, which is very interesting, is that as some of our colleague was talking about that, there is how we can maintain a alternate kind of collaterals. In the banking system, without collateral, no finance is possible. So how to go for the alternate type of collaterals which the public sector will bring in the PPP model. Thank you.
Thanks very much for those dynamic response. I think that I like this producer-private-public partnership. I think we have a new term here. Of course, I wanted to turn to you next to actually ask you the exact same question. So please, Bruce.
All right, yeah. I just wanted for all of us to remind ourselves about the essence of successful public-private partnerships, which is we should all remind ourselves what the appropriate role of the public sector is and what the appropriate role of the private sector is, and that the public sector provides public goods. And then in that enabling environment, the private sector does its best. What are those public goods? Well, there should be roads, there should be electricity, there should be communication facilities, there should be rule of law and the sanctity of contracts. And within that environment, the private sector can deliver. You cannot have a cold storage chain if there's no road and there's no electricity and there's no transport. You cannot be competitive in the market if the telecommunication system doesn't work. All of these are the enabling elements of that environment within which private sector can act and deliver private credit, because credit will not make an unprofitable project profitable. And you cannot force the banks to lend to unprofitable projects.
No, thank you. Very well said about how, very interrelated, the relationships between the public-private side of things are. I just wanted to turn a little bit towards healthy food. Anya, if I could, turn back to you and ask your views on how production and consumption of healthier foods could be promoted. And do you think that we're on the right trajectory, or what needs to happen from your perspective on a policy side? Yes.
I don't know if you if you chose the right person for that question. Having lived in Europe for up until last July, there has been a huge wave of more healthy food, less sugar, less salt, less fat, led by or started maybe even in the UK, swapping over to US and Europe, continental Europe and Australia, when I came here, to be very honest, I was surprised how sugary, how sweet that many products are. And I still am every time we do a tasting of our products. I still sometimes struggle with that. And as I have a very personal passion on bio, or you would call it biological food in German, but more on the organic food side, I've been asking myself that question: how could you transition slowly but steadily? And I think it's going to be a mixture maybe somehow. And when I studied, or when I was working still with Aldi, and we did a lot of policy work as well, looking at the WHO documentation and seeing the diabetics rate in the Philippines, yes, I think there's a great potential to do that, but how do you shift people's mindset, and how do you shift what they crave for, and how they've been talked to and advertised to over decades? It is a hard way. It's a long way for sure. And I think it has to be a combination of maybe unknowingly to consumers slowly start reducing sugar or salt contents, but at the same time advertising heavily on healthier products. I think you cannot do it either way, and I'm saying this unknowingly because for Germany, I can just speak about that, we try to lower salt contents over the course of a few years in bread, where if you ask any German, and Germans love bread, nobody would tell you that there's a lot of salt in bread. But there is a lot of hidden salt in bread, and Germans eat a lot of bread. And that's kind of, if you would even do a campaign and everybody knows that it's healthier if you eat less with that, it's this hidden one that you don't want to change over from one day to another and change your taste, but you have to slowly degrade it down. And I think that's where policy could come in, because when we started it, customers turned away from our bread with Aldi after 4, 5, 6 months, and it took another step, adding a little bit salt again, and then slowly and spanning even that timeline longer. So I think what the UK has done was a very stringent way of introducing taxes and introducing additional fees that had to be paid and heavy monitoring. Germany is on the opposite way, just having pure competition, run the documentation and run the process, but somewhere it probably lies in the middle of it. But this would be definitely something where public-private partnership could very well work.
Thanks very much. I wonder if I could, Shri Gavranhan, if I could just ask you this question. I know it's not something that maybe you were expecting, but I do think it was interesting perspective on looking, how can we encourage this kind of, different things that are going on in this behavior?
Behavioral aspect, I would say, especially in India, when we talk about organic foods or good, healthy food, so we expect that at a price of a very inorganic thing. So that's a very challenging thing, that we need good quality, but at a very low price. That's a difficult thing to say. But having said that, so this food change behavior is one aspect, but then first thing is that how do we get the quality of food, good food? So that's very crucial, that at the right from the production stage, how we get actually, if we are saying something is organic, whether it is organic, really organic. If we are saying something is natural, whether it is actually natural. So the entire process, right from the production system to certification to verification, is a very challenging thing. And whatever additional cost it entails in terms of ensuring that a particular product is produced in a certain way, it is certified, it is verified, that entails additional cost. So if we are able to ensure that the additional cost is, the consumer is ready to pay that additional cost, So the real good, healthy produce will come up. So for that also, again, I would say that the production system, at the base level, the production system, again, we have to depend on the entire community-based system in production system. For example, we are promoting natural farming in a big way in India. But whether we really have the natural ingredients to that extent. So that is another very challenging thing, that the natural ingredients, the so-called natural ingredient, whether they are really natural. One major thing which Professor Gulati keeps on saying, that the food, the inputs that we get, the inputs, then how do we certify that? How do we certify that? So that's a major challenge. And he talks about this because of practicing natural or organic, the yield also gets reduced. So if the yield reduces, then one is following the practices. Second is how do you compensate the reduction in yield also. But more than that, if the ingredients are proper, if the ingredients used for this production system are proper, they meet the requirements, they meet the natural requirement, nutrient requirements, then I don't think that can also be addressed. So I think these are the certain areas, aspects which we need to see, that the entire production system, the pricing mechanism, the certification and verification mechanism, this how do we do? And secondly, again, I would say, like I mentioned in my earlier address, that communities have to be organized. Because if one farmer does organic farming or natural farming, the farmers around them do the other system of farming practices, then how does it address? So some bit of adulteration, the agri system, if the neighboring farm is not practicing a particular system, it can translate to the other farming system, other farmers also. So I think that whole lot of thing, right from the production stage to the consumers willing to pay a higher price, I think that is key to it.
Thank you. I see Professor Ashok, you would like to say a few words.
On this particular question, healthy diets, I think besides healthy diets, those diets have to be nature friendly, benign on soil, water, greenhouse gas emissions, and biodiversity, because that's our main concern today. Education of the consumers. Are they willing to pay a little premium for that? Whether it is organic, or whether it is low carbon rice, or at the highest level a campaign. And I'll give you one little example. Prime Minister of India initiated, last year was the year of millets in the UN. And we were hosting G20 meetings, all the 20 leaders. One dinner was only millets. All the G20 heads of the states had to take different dishes made of millets. So he has a program called Lifestyle for Environment. So if you start at a very high level, then many people start following, and a sort of a social mobilization starts. Few thoughts, education. The other is taxation of sugary elements. Last, at some stage I was looking at Western diets, protein-rich, Atkinson diet at that time. A kilogram of beef means 14,000 liters of water. If you switch from beef to bean, from 14,000 liters of water, less than 400 liters of water. But this education that plant-based proteins can be very benign to environment, I think this education has to spread. You need protein, but should we go for beef or should we go for beans? And plant-based proteins, and now even meat can be produced in the lab. So these innovations are coming, science is coming, which can save the natural capital. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Again, some great insights. I'm wondering, we have a little bit of time, I'm wondering if there are any questions from the audience. Any brave souls? I see there's a hand up there. A couple of, wow, okay. Please. And who do you want to direct the question
good afternoon. I'm Manuel Aquino with the Congressional Policy and Budget Research Department. First, it's very comforting to listen when tweaking policy works, like the expanding credit access for the whole value chain. And in regard to the point raised by Sir here, with regards to collaterals, I remember that in the 1990s, the old Philippine Central, it was then the Philippine Central Bank, tweaked its central bank circular to allow for credit access based on projected income flows and not simply on collaterals. And it was found out later on that the repayment rates of microfinance creditors were actually in the very high 90s. So tweaking policy works, and that's good. But I would go back to your point on accountability of the private sector. How do you ensure that technology would not be used for uncompetitive practices? Like, I hear anecdotal stories of farmers not being able to sell their produce because the trader is in cahoots with the market because of the technology. Second is, how do you accept accountability when warehouses and cold storage facilities are being used to manipulate prices? Perhaps, what should the policy be then? Thank you.
Wow, that's a big question. Can I ask, who wants to, I'll let you guys, here.
Well, we need to spread the technology as broad as possible and not only give it to a few, right? So, for example, in spreading out, say, the results of R&D, the basic science can be done by the CG system. That basic science can then be adapted at a country level by the National Agricultural and Research System, and the results are then entered into the National Extension System. If that system works, then a great deal of farmers can benefit from that technology, instead of licensing it to a few. So cold storage can only be democratic if the means to acquire the technology for cold storage is also democratic, meaning that, hey, there ought to be more than a few people who can buy a car or a truck that can be fitted out for cold storage. If the cars are so expensive that only the rich can invest in it, then it doesn't work. So we really need to democratize access not only to R&D, but also to the means of production and being able to enter into business.
Thanks, President.
Just to add what actually the question was on the collateral. I think it's a very important question to the bankers. And as you rightly said, that the microfinance, actually the growth of microfinance, one of the reasons is the non-collateral based. So what we want to shift from collateral to the cash-based financing mechanism, which is possible, which is we are doing it to the crop production level to understand, but there is a success factor here, is that it must link with the market. If it is not linked with the market, we cannot calculate the cash flow. So that is the only problem we are facing across the banking sector. But we are trying to move from the collateral-based financing to the cash-based financing. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I see the gentleman over here, please.
My name is Vincent from Farm Advocacy, a startup founder. So I'd like to ask a question to both the Philippine Central Bank representative, Mr. Bruce, and also from the experience of India. In India, nowadays there's a startup who was able to scale up the commodity collateralized financing in grains. But in the Philippines, it's still non-existing. So my question is, what are the fundamental differences in terms of policies of banking sector in the Philippines, and what is India doing? Why did it, that innovation came about? Thank you.
In terms of policy for the startups, Government of India has come out with very robust system for promoting startups. There are different funding mechanisms, and government has also incentivizing startups at various levels, right from the startup level, early stage, mid stage, and a later stage also. So I think the funding mechanism from Government of India and a free hand to these startups, I think that is what is playing a crucial role in India.
Just to add to what Mr. Raut said, see, collateral based, collateralization of the goods or whatever the produce is being stored in the warehouses, or so you need a policy at a central bank level, at the government level. And now this has to be considered by the bank also as a collateral for financing the post-harvest. So this is basically, these are coming as a post-harvest finance. And this collateral need a clear-cut policy at a government level, because there might be loss. There might be some kind of insurance should be there. There might be some insect pest. So how to manage those? And in India, I think they have gone even beyond that. They have now made it to the e-based. So that is also the new area where the collateral also can be e-based collateral, and it can be freely traded in the market.
Can I add on the, commodity-based financing, where is the problem coming? If there is a policy that government at the drop of a hat can put a stocking limit on the traders, that you can't stock more than this quantity, what happens to that entire storage and the financing against that? And that is to control central bankers' concern of inflation. They feel if food inflation is going up, somebody is manipulating, and therefore put stocking limits on them so that things come out. So it's a transition that we have to think about as we move from production part to the value chain part post-harvest. And unless there is sufficient supply available and government feels comfortable that a few private sector big players, at present they can build silos, but on government behalf, they can't keep their storage. The big, I don't want to name the business houses, but they are building silos for government, so that government gives 30 years guarantee that this will be the rate of return on your investment. But the commodity that will be kept in those silos would belong to the government. So there is a fine balance, and still India has to transition to a free economy in agriculture.
Example from Thailand in 2014 and 15. The rice, that has changed the government also. Because of this rice, hoarding of rice. And the price was so high, and the bank was supposed to buy those rice and pay the higher price than the market. So that also having, what you were talking about. So that is also one of the major reasons that most of the governments are not much interested in this commodity, stocking and marketing system.
Bruce, please.
Just quickly, the government has dozens of programs that actually provide direct lending to projects. But if you added up all of those dozens of programs, it actually doesn't meet the total demand for loans. The banks want to lend money. In fact, that's their business. They only make money if they lend money. But the problem is they're having a hard time finding credit-worthy projects. And the reason why they're having a hard time finding credit-worthy projects is because the public goods that are necessary to create and maintain credit-worthy projects are not there. So the banks cannot lend money if the Department of Agriculture is not doing its job. The banks cannot lend money if the Department of Transportation is not doing its job. The banks cannot lend money if the Department of Telecommunications is doing its job. So the public goods necessary to create credit-worthy projects should be working, and then you won't have a problem with the banks.
Thank you. We're already over time, but I know, ma'am, I'll let you ask your question. I'm having various signals sent to me here, but please go ahead.
Yes, please. Listening to all of you, I have a few observations. The technologies that are not coming from the ground level, more from the labs, like gene editing, like, you have mentioned about the plants which have higher photosynthesis compared to the normal plants, 5 times higher. And then the technologies like drones, genetically engineered seeds, they take away the right of farmers and their self-reliance and sovereignty and freedom, making them dependent on government or organizations controlling these technologies. This, there can be, this can lead to concentration of knowledge, power, finance, in terms of finance and decision making. So how do you ensure this is not the case, and how do you evaluate if new technologies are really nature-based solutions or not greenwashing? So that's my question. Because if you don't stop logging, having genetically engineered plants which can have greater photosynthesis is of no meaning. First, we need to stop the flow of, if your faucet is not working, you need to stop the water first rather than start cleaning. That is also important, but first is first. We need to stop that first. So how do we ensure that our policy decisions are really farmer-friendly and they are not taking the rights of the farmers away from it? That's what is my concern. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I appreciate the question. I think from my perspective, I think this entire topic of, call it like, maybe it's decarbonization or nature-based solutions. I mean, end of the day, it's a very complex problem. I don't think there's kind of like a silver bullet or a very singular pathway that will solve the problem, right? And I think everything that we've heard throughout the day is that there's multiple different approaches to the system. And I think your point is 100% valid. If something is structurally needs to be changed, right? Do you just bite the bullet and make that binary shift? Or is this kind of like, do you keep kind of like applying a bandage on a situation and hope that things improve? And I think from my perspective, I think probably, and I think most people will agree that you need a full suite of solutions, right? You need things that kind of like helps to alleviate the pain, and you need things to find a more structural change. But given where we are in just overall where things stand, I think you need to pursue all causes of action. And more selfishly, from my perspective, as a financial investment firm, we will invest in projects that have positive economical return. So from our given where we stand, like the gene editing was a project that we think has great potential to succeed, and therefore provides an attractive risk reward. So from that perspective, we were fairly interested to back that company. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that we've stopped looking at other things, and we hope, right, there are other kind of like solutions out there that's even more broad-based, that's more structural, and kind of like end of the day, creating positive economic value for everyone in the chain, and which means that the investors can make a reasonable rate of return. So from, I guess the summary is that it's not a binary, either or kind of situation.
Thanks very much. I think we have to wrap up. I'm keeping you from your dinner. So I wanted to thank everyone for their fantastic presentations, answers to questions, as well as the questions from the audience. So we've heard lots of great ideas, new ideas, suggestions. Looking forward, I think that, it is about partnerships. It is about the public and the private working together to find solutions. And I do like the word co-creation. So let us go forth and co-create together. Thank you very much, everyone.